So we have a girl we've been taking care of. After her first adjustment, her therapist called us. What did you guys do with her? Because she's different. And she's like, I got to come in and see what you're doing, the therapist. It's not because we're amazing. It's not because I'm the best doctor. It's because that's how the body was designed to function.
You talk about mental state in there, and obviously that plays a role in the brain. And I feel like right now there is literally, I don't know if this is the right word, but like an epidemic of mental health.
The safety part of the brain tells you, no, you can't do it. It's too expensive. You don't have enough time. There's no way you can move. But the enlightened is the part of the brain that says, now you can do that. There's a way. We'll find a way. It's the optimistic part of the brain. And that's what we activate when we create balance in the brain. The issue that someone has, the pain that someone has, is not the cause. The cause is a diseased brain. What is up, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Profitable Chiro Network. Heather, I'm so stoked about this episode.
Me too.
This is one that we have been planning to talk about for some time.
Patiently waiting.
Yeah, patiently waiting. And it's one that I've said, like, we're not going to talk about it, or we'll talk about it later. So we're 11 episodes in as of this one. And I want to talk about chiropractic care. Specifically neurologically based chiropractic care. But this is the big caveat in the beginning, is that if you're not measuring the brain, then you are not neurologically based chiropractor. So I'm just going to be really offensive right out the gate and probably make some people mad. And then all the conversations are going to come up about infighting and all the things.
Right.
But yeah, it's just where I stand on it. So like measuring the nervous system and measuring imbalances within the brain, I believe are two different things.
I would agree.
And we're going to talk about the word subluxation.
Your favorite word.
My favorite word. So obviously ask me lots of questions because you know I'm going to get fired up on this one. But before we get too far into all of the stuff and all the science and the neurologically based chiro part, I got to read something from BJ Palmer.
Okay.
So I want to read the big idea because I think this sets the stage on why I'm so passionate about what we're going to talk about. And I'm also going to share some things that BJ said later after this was written. What's up?
I was just going to say, before you share that, maybe give a short, brief explanation of who BJ Palmer is.
Yeah, so BJ Palmer, he was second in line. So his dad, Dee, founded chiropractic. And then after his dad founded it, BJ was kind of the one who was like the really good marketer. And he's the one who sort of, I don't want to say made it cool because I don't know that it's ever been cool. And like my circle, it's the most cool thing. But BJ was a really good marketer. So people started to use it and understand it. And that's when the chiropractic profession kind of got attacked by the AMA. But BJ was the one who was passionate about it. He was really good at speaking about it. It wasn't too high level. Dee was like very spiritual. And there's you could get into some places where people feel like maybe there was like darkness in what he was doing, but we know that God, woo woo, and God can redeem anything and turn it into good. So I don't think that's an issue, because where we're going with it will be straight up God, biblical conversation as we get into it.
Yeah, let's go. Okay.
So, all right, let's do it. So this is the big idea by BJ Palmer. And the big idea, this is so important because it sets the stage for remembering why we do what we do as chiropractors. So for anybody who's watching who's a practitioner, this is meant to challenge you. Anybody who's watching who maybe isn't a practitioner but just interested about the brain, about neuroscience, about neurology, and how chiropractic is even a piece of that, this is going to kind of explain and fit some of those details into place. So here's BJ's big idea. This is what it says. It says that a slip on the snowy sidewalk in winter is a small thing. It happens to millions. A fall from a ladder in the summer is a small thing. That is also happens to millions. The slip or the fall produces a subluxation. We'll talk about the word subluxation. The subluxation is a small thing. The subluxation produces pressure on a nerve. That pressure is a small thing. The pressure cuts off flow of mental impulses, not impulses to organs, mental impulses. This is key.
Oh, that's key.
The decreased flowing is a small thing. That decreased flowing produces a diseased body and brain. That is a big thing to that man. Multiply that sick man by 1,000 and you can control the physical and mental welfare of a city. Multiply that man by 1,000,000 and you shape the physical and mental destiny of a state. Multiply that man by 130 million and you forecast and can prophesy the physical and mental status of an entire nation. Now comes a man. Any one man is a small thing. That man gives an adjustment, what we do as chiropractors. The adjustment is a small thing. The adjustment replaces the subluxation. That is a small thing. The adjusted subluxation releases pressure upon the nerves. That is a small thing. The released pressure upon nerves restores health to a man. That is a big thing to that man. Multiply that well man by 1,000 and you step up physical and mental welfare of a city. Multiply the well man by 1,000,000 and you increase the efficiency of a state. Multiply that well man by 130 million, and you have produced a healthy, wealthy, and better race for posterity. So the adjustment of subluxation to release pressure upon nerves, to restore mental impulse flow, to restore health is big enough to rebuild thoughts and actions of the world. The idea that knows cause, that can correct cause of dis-ease, is one of the biggest ideas known. Without it, nations fall. With it, nations rise. The idea is the biggest I know of. Dr. B.J. Palmer. Mm-hmm. Wow. So there's so much stuff in here to unpack. But the reason I share that with you is because I think most people, when they're talking about chiropractic, when they're thinking about chiropractic, the traditional way, which I would argue is completely wrong, by the way, is that this bone pinches on this nerve and it goes to that muscle, and that's why you have pain there. Or this bone pinches on this nerve and it goes to your digestive system, and that's why you have digestive issues. But if we read in the big idea, literally the pressure cuts off the flow of mental impulses, right? And it produces a diseased body and brain. So the brain, I would argue, is the key in this.
Yeah.
And so when we look at it, like he talks in here, right? The idea that knows the cause, like he even says it himself, the subluxation is a small thing. Mm-hmm. The subluxation is not the cause. The fall is not the cause. The issue that someone has, the pain that someone has, is not the cause. The cause is a diseased brain. And the subluxation is a symptom. The pain is a symptom. And if we're chasing symptoms, we're never addressing the cause. The brain tells the body what to do. How are we doing so far?
Good. Yeah, like you talk about mental state in there, and obviously that plays a role in the brain. And I feel like right now there is literally, I don't know if this is the right word, but like an epidemic of mental health.
Yeah.
And the simple fact that like people are trying to make it more normal, and it's becoming a lot more common. And the big thing within that, it has me thinking like, well, what if these people were getting brain-based adjusted? Like, what would their mental state be like?
Yeah.
And the ripple effect that it would have on the world, like he said.
Yep. And what's cool is like, if you know some of the history of BJ, like he was a big visionary thinker. Mm-hmm. So BJ was talking about like, let's go clear out prisons. Like, let's go adjust people in prisons. He wasn't talking about like, let's go find people who got in car accidents. Right. And adjust. I'm not saying that's wrong, but like his big vision was not, let's just get people out of pain.
It's because there was like a mental, emotional like discrepancy within people that were in prisons.
Exactly. And I don't even think he fully knew what him and his dad were onto when he wrote some of these things. So this is back in like the 1930s, right? And I'll share some other stuff with BJ and Dee Dee here in a second that I think is super interesting. But I think before we do that, we have to get into like, what is subluxation? Okay. Because I think everything hinges on that. So if you're not a chiropractor, and some chiropractors probably don't know, but subluxation would be like the thing that happens when your body tries to protect itself. So some people would say that's a bone out of place. Right. Some people would say that's the bone out of a place that's pinching on a nerve. Other people would define subluxation as like, there's got to be muscle tension and there's got to be edema. And this is and then there's got to be movement restriction. And these are the kind of things that we're taught in chiropractic school to look for specifically in the spine.
The kinked water hose.
Exactly. But sub just means lower or less than. And luxation has two words. So luxation, one is just like dislocation. So below the level of a dislocation, but out of place. Okay. But the other definition, if we look at the word lux, is light. So like below light. So when we get into BJ, and I think, again, this is not a historical conversation about BJ. This is about chiropractic and how we view it in our office. And I think why we can help some of the people we've helped who've been to every practitioner out there. And there's a philosophical component. We'll get to the philosophy later. But this idea that if someone is shining less than their absolute 100% light, that is a subluxation. And it's a mental issue. But what happens is when we have stress, like a fall on the sidewalk, as the big idea talks about, that creates a stress in the system. And our brain tells our body to go into these protective patterns that would, quote unquote, pull the bone out of alignment. And as a chiropractor, what we're looking for most of the time is how do we move those bones back into alignment? But I would argue that that's not even true, because as BJ said, if we're looking for the cause, what tells the bones to move? The muscles. But what tells the muscles to fire?
Your brain.
The brain. So if we don't look at the brain,
Right.
then we miss the cause.
So if you're addressing the subluxation by palpating what bone is out of place, you're technically not addressing the cause, you're addressing the symptom.
A symptom. And I would go on record to say that if we are just addressing symptoms, like a subluxation is a symptom
Right.
of a greater cause. And if we don't address the cause, if we don't ask the question of why is that subluxation there in the first place, then we miss what we can effectively do as chiros, and we get put into the same
All other
world
providers.
as I'm just a more expensive Tylenol, or I'm just a more expensive pain med, or I'm here to get people out of pain, or whatever it is. And so there has to be, in my opinion, a point where we stop looking at the symptom and we start addressing the cause,
Which is the brain.
which is the brain. And then we can get into why the brain
Right.
causes these things in the body in the first place. But the brain, we go back to the brain. So here's what's super interesting. Is it like a simple way to think about this if you're struggling with wrapping your head around this concept? So let's say that there was a fire in here right now and the smoke detector is going off. So wherever you're sitting, wherever you're listening, there's a fire and the smoke detector is going off. The smoke detector is loud and annoying. It's meant to get your attention.
Sure.
No one in their right mind would go to the smoke detector and be like, that is really loud and really annoying. Let me take the batteries out. You would go look around wherever you are and you would try to find what is making the smoke detector go off.
Yeah.
Is there smoke somewhere? Is there a fire somewhere? Is it the carbon monoxide point? Like, you would try to figure out what the cause is. You wouldn't just go to the symptom. But so it's very easy to think about in our day-to-day lives, a symptom versus a cause. But for some reason with our bodies, we've very much been trained to be like, let's just go fix the symptoms. Let's look at the x-ray. Oh, you have this bone out of place, or oh, you have this curve in your spine. Let's fix the curve in your spine. But the reason that a curve in your spine would be there, the reason, in my opinion, that a subluxation would be there is because the brain is telling the muscles what to do to create a protective safety mechanism within your system to keep your spine safe and protected.
Right.
Or your spinal cord safe and protected.
Right. So it's a very normal response to the way God designed you.
A normal response to an abnormal amount of stress. Yep. 100%. Normal response to an abnormal amount of stress. So then that brings up the question in my world is, why would we want to slay a subluxation if our brain put it there as a protective mechanism?
Slay a subluxation. No, I know. Yeah. No, I get it. Okay.
Like, maybe I'm being harsh, but for real, that's like a legitimate question. For anybody listening, however long you've been practicing, like, why would we want to get rid of a subluxation if that is the very thing that was put there by your brain to keep you safe and protected?
Yeah. Because if that's the case, then they're literally just chasing the pain.
And it's no different than if there's a fire in your house and you're like, the smoke detectors are annoying, I'm just going to take the smoke detectors out.
Right.
And again, from a practical standpoint, it doesn't, like, it puts you in the same category as Advil, Tylenol, PT. It creates tons of competition.
Yeah.
And these are not like mincing words, but this is why BJ had this huge vision. I mentioned this before. He was like, let's go into the prisons. Let's go into mental institutions and start to release people from the traps that they're stuck in their own bodies mentally.
Yeah, because he knew there was so much more of like an emotional and mental component to providing the chiropractic adjustment, very specific one.
Yep, exactly. So check this out. This is what's super cool. We'll get into some of what BJ said if I can get my thing up here real quick. So one of the things that BJ talked about later on is that he actually defines like how he would define subluxation. And so this is what he says. He says, up until a few months ago, this is 1931, it was a lecture that he did called The Hour Has Arrived. So in 1931, this is what BJ said. So this is the dude like second in line ever to like think about chiropractic and make it popular for the world as a thing that people would do to like heal their bodies the way God designed us to. So up until a few months ago, it was generally believed that you could locate a subluxation by palpation. Palpation just means feeling. Okay. So we're feeling the spine, we're feeling muscle, we're feeling where a bone might be out of place, or there's more warmth, or there's edema, or whatever it may be. With a spinograph, which is what now known as an X-ray,
Okay.
by location of tender nerves, taut fibers, or contractured muscles. So all the things that we're trained to look for in chiropractic school.
Yes.
And then he goes to say, this is so cool. None of these can locate a subluxation.
Even though that's what you are learning in school.
Any or all of these indicative guides can and will locate misalignments.
Okay.
So then the question becomes,
Yeah.
what is a subluxation?
Right. Because he literally just said that it's
Because
up
he
until a few
just
months
said
ago.
an X-ray
Yeah.
can't even find one. So for all the people out there who want to hate on us because we don't take X-rays all the time, there are times when we need to. I think
Yeah.
if you do a really good exam, you can rule out red flags. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with taking X-rays, but I just go back to the point of like, we're going to identify your subluxation on an X-ray. Well, if that's true, why did the dude who founded the thing say that though you're just locating misalignments? So then the question becomes like, well, what's the something more? Then what's an actual subluxation?
Yeah, because he's literally saying that the misalignments are the taut and tender fibers, the bone out of place, edema, etc.
Yep, exactly. And so then we get into this whole conundrum of a conversation when we start to understand the brain, that it's about way more than just locating tight fibers, then look at something on an X-ray. And I think it goes back to inherent in the definition is that subluxation, meaning less than light.
Okay.
And so this is what Dee, so this is BJ's dad. So we just talked about BJ, and this is what Dee was obsessed with. So he wasn't obsessed with bones out of place. So check this out. Here's what he says about the nervous system. So this is in the textbook of Science, Art, and Philosophy for chiropractic students and practitioners. This goes back to 1910, by the way. So I got to give you like a little bit of history just to realize like how long some of this stuff has been around. So here's what Dee says. He says, life is the expression of tone. In that sentence is the basic principle of chiropractic. Tone is the normal degree of nerve tension. So like a guitar string can be tuned to a certain tension.
Okay.
This is how our life is expressed, is through tone. And it's through the tone of our nervous system. And then we go on. Tone is expressed in functions by the normal elasticity, activity, strength, and excitability of various organs as observed in a state of health. Consequently, the cause of disease is any variation in tone, nerves too tense or too slack. So this is what I think is special and what's missing for the most part from the conversation. If I have a bone out of place, if I have a misalignment that Dee said, that's all we're identifying with an X-ray and all the palpation that we're taught in school.
Okay.
So if I can identify a misalignment, the question still becomes, why would that be there in the first place? Again, we want to get back to the cause. Could it be that the brain is creating a misalignment with the way muscles are firing, with the way our bones are moving, in order to create less tension in the spinal cord so that the body is doing the best that it can to fire at a specific tone, and it will curve the spine. We can take out curves in the spine. We can move bones out of place. We can compress discs. All of these things are simply an attempt by the body to create the right amount of tone within the spinal cord on its own.
Only physical, would you say? Or are you talking like more, can you describe this in like a mental tone?
Yeah, so before we go mental though, let's just stick with like what happens in the physical body, because we'll go up and we'll get to more of a mental place. So physically, we have to have a certain amount of tone, just like a guitar string it has to sound right. It has to have a certain tone in order to sound normal. If it's out of tune, it sounds like crap, right? So the same thing, Dee's basically saying, if the tone of our nervous system isn't correct, then our body is going to be diseased, and not function well. So then from there, if we can look at the body and go, okay, well, maybe subluxation, what we have traditionally called subluxation, is not the bones out of place or the tight muscles, but it's the brain's attempt to create a certain amount of tension within the spinal cord on its own.
Okay.
So then the question is, why would those get there in the first place? So again, what we're looking at is like, to me, I think about the fact that a subluxation is the body's natural protective mechanism to create the right amount of tension in the spinal cord. So if that's the body's natural protective mechanism, then why would we remove it? Wouldn't we be doing more harm than we are good?
Yeah. Yeah. It goes back to the episode of where you're talking about homeostasis and harmony.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Or coherence. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if we can get on board with this, like maybe it's possible that that's not what we should be looking for, and we should be looking at tone, then my question goes back to like, well, why would the body put those quote unquote, what we traditionally defined as subluxations there in the first place, which I would argue are not subluxations. Mm-hmm. I think that the subluxation goes back to the big idea that we read in the beginning, which is mental impulse, which goes to the question that you asked me, which is, what does the mental side of this do? So our brains cannot differentiate a thought from reality. Our brain doesn't care about truth as much as it does feeling. And when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, all our brain really wants is safety. Mm-hmm. We want safety and protection. And we'll pretty much sacrifice everything else in order to maintain some level of safety and protection. And so if we put bones out of place, this is a safety protective mechanism to create a right amount of tension in the spinal cord. If we go and remove those, then we could potentially be making someone worse, and unless we're asking the question, what's happening in the brain? Mm-hmm. And if the brain gets weaker on one side versus the other, and we start addressing the brain, now we don't have to remove subluxation, but what we can do is we can come in and we can just balance out someone's brain, still by adjusting joints of the spine.
Yeah.
And when we create balance in the brain will say, hey, we actually don't need to tighten muscles here, or we don't need to have this bone out of place here, or we don't need to compress that disc here. And then the body's actually healing itself.
So what do you say to all the chiropractors that say they're like neurologically based and are addressing the brain when they're technically adjusting subluxations, but like in their thought process, they're affecting the nerves that directly correlate to the brain?
So all of the research that I have seen in the chiropractic world says that definitively when we adjust the spine, we're affecting the brain. Mm-hmm. So I understand, and I hear every chiro out there right now who's probably like rolling over and just pulling their hair out and wanting to cuss me out and say like, but we are neurologically based. Like it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. But my question is like, if you're saying you're neurologically based just because the research says that you affect the brain, but you have no real tools to measure the brain, or you have no real way to know because what we know about the adjustment is that only at a certain speed does it affect the frontal cortex, which is king.
Only at a certain speed of the adjustment.
Only at a certain speed of the adjustment. So it's got to be faster than 0.2 of a second. Mm-hmm. So then we get into this conundrum of like, well, what if I have a really bad day and I'm just adjusting slower?
Sure.
Or someone has a bunch of like just so much tension in their neck and I'm trying to blast through it all when I'm adjusting them. I think that there have to be specific ways in which we know that every single time they're getting adjustment that's faster than 0.2 of a second. And that's Heidi Havoc's research. Like, this is not just me making it up.
There's like legit science behind it.
Behind it. And then you can get into more of like their, matching the frequency. Remember, Dee talked about tone in 1910, matching the frequency or the tone of the beta somatomotor rhythm in the brain. So there's like all these different places we could go. We don't have to go deep dive down all of those subtle nuances. But there's another piece of it too. So for those chiros who are rolling over and they're just like pissed because they're like, but when we adjust, we're affecting the brain. I'm like, okay, that might be true. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you can prove it. I know that we can by the way we adjust in our office, which I wish more people would get on board with, but that's a conversation for a different time. The other component of it though is like, if you're doing thermography or if you're doing surface EMG or you're doing HRV, you're getting a measure of the nervous system, okay, but you're not necessarily getting a measure of the brain. So yes, the brain sets your heart rate variability.
Right.
But do you know what imbalances are in the brain from the brainstem to the frontal cortex to the cerebellum?
Like which part of the brain is directly affecting the HRV discrepancy? And
can you measure, so if you're saying you're brain based or neurologically based, but you're only brain based or neurologically based because you believe that adjusting the spine affects the brain, which
Right.
definitively through all the science that it does, 100% for sure. At a certain speed, it affects the prefrontal cortex. Only when there's a presence of subluxation, by the way, which is a really interesting one. So we get no effect if we're not in a spot where the body needs adjusted. But it gets back to the point of like, what's the definition of where the body needs adjusted? So, which again, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. But I think it's important to think about and talk about the idea that potentially you could be adjusting someone and making them worse. Because what we know is that if we adjust at a certain speed and a certain frequency on the left side of the body, we will affect the right side frontal cortex.
No matter what your thought process is and how you adjust. Okay.
Yes. Unless it's slower than 0.2 of a second. So what if someone had a left side frontal cortex weakness, but we're adjusting them on the left side, thinking that we're doing good because that's where we feel all the muscle tension.
That's where the subluxation
But
is.
the whole time, we're just strengthening their right side of the brain even more and even more and even more. And we're not helping them recover, again, the mental impulse piece of it. Because there's a balance that needs to happen within the brain in order for the brain to be able to turn off those postural muscles on one side versus the other in the first place.
Yeah.
And so the reason, this gets really crazy, the reason that someone might feel tension only on the left side of their body, and that's what you've been trained to adjust for, is because if there's tension on the left side of the body, the left side frontal cortex controls postural muscles on the left side of the body. And so if those postural muscles are turned off because the left side frontal is weak, and we just continue to fire, we're continuing to hit muscles because we're adjusting where the tight muscles are, but we're strengthening the right side of the brain, we're actually making all of their imbalances worse. So true neurologically based would be actually measuring parts of the brain and being able to say definitively, this is how we should adjust you on the left side of your body, on the right side of your body equally, and measuring those along the way, cerebellum, brainstem, frontal cortex.
That was a lot.
Yeah. Where do we go from there? So if we get back to the idea of tone and like expression of life and what BJ talked about when he wrote the big idea, is like, this is what he understood as would clear out the mental institutions. Because when we adjust at a certain speed, at a certain frequency, we literally are waking up the part of the brain that is more connected to faith, to hope, to optimism, putting someone back into what Mark 5 or any of the Gospels would say in their right mind.
Well, we talked about on another episode about frequencies and like the lower frequencies and getting up to the higher frequencies and more like joyful and more like content and things like that. So you're literally changing the frequency within their mental state to become into like a higher frequency or vibration, you would say.
Yeah, I can't remember if we talked about it on the last episode, but I'll dive into it because I think it's important. So if we look at the way that the brain is organized, so the brain develops from bottom up, but it's controlled from top down.
Okay.
So we don't have to get into like all the weeds of that, but if we talk about bottom up, brainstem develops first. So brainstem only cares about safety. And then once the brainstem has some semblance of safety, I have food, I have shelter, I have water, I have warmth, then the limbic system will start to come online. Did we talk about this before?
I mean, you've done bits and pieces along the way.
Okay, so it's like understanding how the brainstem or how the brain is organized is crucial, because if brainstem is just safety, then what we have, those are lower frequencies. Or we could say, like Dotson calls it, levels of energy, right? So the brainstem is literally the whole brain is organized exactly like his chart is. There's lower levels of energy, safety. I don't care about joy. I don't care about helping other people. I don't care about having gratitude.
Yeah.
I don't care about being happy or appreciative or enjoying life if I'm in a brainstem state. I can't, like, it doesn't help my chances of survival to have those emotions unless I feel safe first.
That makes sense. Yep.
So we have to have safety. So this is how the brain develops. Once we have safety, then think of like a 3-month-old baby. They start smiling, they start giggling, they start laughing, they start becoming ticklish. They don't do that right when they come out, because they still don't, like, there's a level of not safety present because their brainstem's developing. Once they get to safety, though, then the limbic system starts to come online. That's the emotional part of the brain. So that emotional part of the brain is the part of the brain that's responsible for all of our complex emotions. And then they just get more complex as we get older. So this is why, you know, the mid-level of the brain, like temper tantrums with kiddos, that's the temporal lobe. It's starting to come online. But the reason that kids have temper tantrums like 2-3 years old is because they don't have a frontal cortex to turn off and say, hey, no, it's safe. We don't need to throw a tantrum right now.
It hasn't developed yet.
It hasn't developed yet.
Okay.
Or not fully anyway.
Yeah.
It's starting to, but it's not really fully online until like the age of 7 anyway. So the brain develops from a bottom up. Brainstem, once we have safety, we can start to express emotions. We can start to express joy. Those are those middle levels of energy. Then, this is so cool, when we get into the cortex, which is the most outer level of the brain, last to develop, developing in males up until, I would argue, about the age of 30, maybe just a little bit older. Women just a little bit earlier than that, but just because women are more advanced than us in the first place.
Woo woo.
And so for those, like for that higher level of energy, that is our consciousness. That is our connection to God. It is our faith. It is our hope. It is our optimism. It is our emotional intelligence. It's connecting with another person. It's setting long-term goals and then being able to do the short-term things to stick with it. That's all cortex, outer level of the brain. When the cortex is strong, it can tell and guide the other parts of the brain to say, no, we don't need to express fear right now. We don't need to express worry right now. We don't need to express sadness right now. But that part of the brain is turned off by stress hormones. And so if we have stress, fall, trauma as a kid, birth trauma, bad food that we eat, negative thought patterns, car accidents, like you can name it, any stress starts to turn off that top level of the brain. And if it becomes weaker, then what starts to fire? Our emotional system. And then why do we have people who have anxiety and anger and depression and rage, and they can't control their emotions and they can't control their desire to do certain things? They have no willpower. They feel like they have no self-control. It's because their part of their brain that's responsible for those things is literally shut off by stress hormones. Can you share the story of, like, that's a lot of sciencey stuff in the brain. So we'll bring it back to like a real simple level and kind of make this make sense on like a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
And we can talk about a couple examples and then we'll get into the emotional piece of it because I think that's critical too. But can you tell the story of what happened with Coco last Wednesday? It's almost been exactly a week now when she fell out of the tree. And we'll kind of like, we'll play by play it. So then we can kind of piece together, like, here's what's happening. And this is what BJ was talking about and the big idea. And then what happens if you don't take care of it and what happens if we do take care of it.
Okay. So last Wednesday, Coco was playing outside in our yard. There's like a tree in our front yard that she's not like the most adventurous yet. She's like a very cautious child. So I always encourage her to like be as adventurous and playful as possible. I see kids like climbing up on things. I'm like, go try that out, Coco. So Wednesday, she decided to climb the tree in our front yard just randomly. And I happened to look out our spare bedroom upstairs and see that she was like pretty high in the tree. And like I was encouraging her from afar. I was like, wow, she's never been this high before. Like, that's so cool. I'm so proud of her. So brave.
And I'm pretty sure she's like 10 feet up.
She was extremely high. Yeah, she was like at the highest point of this tree, which, yeah, was...
Her head was sticking. She said her head was sticking up above the top of the like leaves on the top of the tree.
It was for sure over 10 feet tall. I walked downstairs and all of a sudden I hear her screaming. She comes to the front door. I open the front door and she has like this huge gnarly gash on her head. She's got scrapes all down her arm from sliding down the tree. And she's talking about how her foot hurts really badly.
And she had a bloody nose.
Oh, yes. And she had a bloody nose. She was obviously like freaking out. She was scared. she literally didn't know what to do. The first thing she said, though, was, I need to go see Daddy at the office. So she's very smart. She knew exactly what she needed. She needed to get adjusted. But yeah, so it was a little traumatizing for her because it was one of the bigger falls that she's ever experienced. And she's always been a little nervous to climb really high, but she like sees her friends doing it. So I think it also created a little bit of like a more of a resistance for her in climbing the tree.
Yeah. So if we break it down, like, again, we'll go back to what BJ talked about when he wrote The Big Idea. The fall from the tree, not a big deal. Hurting her ankle, not necessarily a big deal. Knocking her head and like bloody nose and all this stuff, according to BJ, not a big deal. But what happens as a result of that stress in her system and how that affects her brain is a big deal. So she has this huge fall. And then what happens is her brain says, oh my gosh, that was a stress. It starts to release stress hormones. And go back and listen to the other episodes of the podcast because I walk through exactly how this happens. So I'm not going to do it here. So those stress hormones turn off the front part of her brain. And you could see this in real time because I remember you saying, can you share what you remember Coco saying about the tree after it happened?
Oh yeah, she said as she like felt herself falling, she was picturing like pillows on the ground to soften her fall.
Yeah, and then after that though, what did she say?
I don't know.
So she was saying, I can't believe I climbed the tree. I should have never done that. It was such a bad idea.
Yes. Yeah. She started like negative self-talking immediately. Like she shouldn't have done that because it was like scary and dangerous and obviously hurt her.
So note how she was empowered and then she has an injury, a fall, which is scary, like rightfully so, straight up. But that scary thing that happened to her put her in a fear state. So then she starts going negative. I should have never climbed the tree. It's too dangerous. Instead of being empowered. And we've seen this before. Like, I remember I told this story a million times because I think it's so powerful to me and impactful. And it literally still guides my parenting. But when we went to Salt Creek Beach, and there was the dad and the son, tide was super low. So there's these tide pools. There's these big rocks at Salt Creek. You can go out and you can go onto the rocks and see like hermit crabs and probably little crabs and all kinds of stuff. Sometimes people find jellyfish and octopus and whatever. So the boys, dad and the son, are walking out and they're like, oh, it's going to be so fun. We're going to climb on the rocks. It's going to be amazing. And then the mom and the daughter are about 10 feet back and they're walking. And the mom's saying to the daughter, she's like, I need you to be really careful. It's really dangerous out there. It's not safe. You could slip, you could fall. And like the boy is so empowered to be adventurous, but the girl wasn't. Same parents, different mindsets, and like it's setting the kiddo up. So you can see how Coco felt empowered. She felt safe to climb the tree. Then she falls and her brain goes into stress state, and now it's all negative.
Immediately into that fight or flight.
Yep, exactly. And that's what it is fight or flight. So the trick, what BJ was talking about, is that the body getting stuck in fight or flight is the subluxation because it brings less than light. Fight or flight turns off the top part of our brain, the part of the brain responsible for faith, hope, optimism. It's also the last to develop. So if our light part of our brain, our connection to God part of our brain, our connection to our true personality, and our God-given identity part of our brain gets turned off by stress hormones, of course, Coco walks in and she's like, I should have never made that decision. It was such a bad decision. It's so dangerous. I can't believe I did that. I'm dumb. Her stress hormones are responsible for that. That's not our true daughter.
Right. That's not her true identity.
And she understands because whatever, you could say brainwash her, but she understands like first thing I need to do in that situation is get adjusted.
Yeah.
Why? Because of what BJ talked about. Because the mental impulse that would prevail if we didn't take care of her and adjust her would be that life is dangerous. And then people become scary and it affects our dopamine. And then we start things that would feel rewarding, feel rewarding.
It just creates this ripple of like fear, negativity, and so forth.
And that fear, negativity thought process continues to trigger stress hormones in the brain. And those stress hormones in the brain weaken the front part of the brain, which is the top part of the brain, the cortex, which is responsible for our success, for our faith, for our hope, for our optimism. It's responsible for us being able to express our light. So again, if we talk about subluxation, what we're literally talking about is not a bone out of place. We're talking about someone expressing less than who God called them on this earth to be.
Yeah. Do you feel like, this is random, but do you feel like those that are maybe like adults or older that have never been adjusted or are continuing in that stress response, that they're furthering and furthering away from their specific God-given identity and potential?
100%. No doubt about it. And I know, and like, that's why I'm so biased towards chiropractic, like straight up so biased towards it. But I know I've seen the power of what it can do for people. Like I've literally taken care of people who said, I felt like I was stuck in a dead end job and this is just what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And I quit my job. I moved to a completely different place. I have no idea why. I just felt like that's what God wanted me to do. I got my dream job. I did all of these things, some of which I may not even agree with now. But like I did all of these things that I would have never done. And now I'm living a life that I feel like I'm on fire.
After being under
care, getting adjusted.
Brain-based care.
Brain-based.
Yeah.
Not just saying we're brain-based because we do a scan.
Right.
But actually measuring different parts of the brain and affecting those parts of the brain with how we do the adjustments. Like that's the game. And so there's a huge, I would argue the biggest part of this is not the slips and falls. Yes, a C-section like can wreck a kid from day one. Yes, birth trauma can wreck a kid from day one. We've seen it time and time again. I've seen this happen with home births. I've seen it happen with C-sections. So there's like no one really immune to it. I mean, as a matter of fact, the research says that 99% of natural births, vaginal birth, no interventions, have some level of traction on the spinal cord. Go back to Dee Dee. What do you talk about? Tone in the nervous system.
Those babies are already immediately experiencing a difference in tone and tension.
Yeah.
No matter the birth process.
Yeah. And then what we say, if emotional state brings us lower because we don't feel safe, we stay lower. Because our emotional state will trigger a physiology, and that physiology will affect what parts of our brain are stronger or weaker.
Right.
And in a stress, worry, fear, protective physiology, guess what fires? The amygdala. And the amygdala is responsible for fear and worry. And then that creates more anxiety. And then we start to worry about everything. And even though stuff's fine, we still worry about it. And this is like, you listen to a lot of people who are super famous right now, and they're just talking about how like, hey, the hard thing is the thing that you need to go towards. And there's a reason why.
Yeah.
Because that's what keeps us in our right mind. If we fear, if we worry, if we're anxious, if we're scared like Coco was, that's why we got her adjusted. And now she's like, I'm ready to climb trees again. And we're like, maybe we should just wait because we're still limping around a little bit,
She's ready, yeah. Because she was able to get out of that stress, fight or flight state.
Yep, exactly.
Can you give an example of a person as a grown adult that you've seen change from being in that fearful, stressed, worried state, like more of like that mental example of a testimony?
Yeah, I could give you lots of examples.
Mental, emotional.
Lots and lots of examples. So
Okay,
one of my
give us a couple.
favorite stories just happened recently, actually. So we have a girl we've been taking care of. After her first adjustment, her therapist called us, like straight up called Danielle and was like, hey, what did you guys do with her? Because she's different. And she's like, I got to come in and see what you're doing, the therapist. So it's not because we're amazing. It's not because I'm the best doctor. It's because that's how the body was designed to function. And as soon as we start to get her brain awakened, because we're actually addressing the balance in her brain, like things start to shift where other people notice, including her therapist. Fast forward, this same person told me a celebration. She was like, I've never wanted to talk to my biological dad. Like I had no desire to. And then one day she said, you know what? I just feel safe enough to do it. And I'm going to reach out to him and talk to him. She said, I've never had a desire to in 20 whatever years.
Crazy.
And she's like, why is that the case? Well, because you feel safe. If you have safety, now you can start to express emotions, an emotion of like, so one of the things that happens in a stress response is we decrease oxytocin. Oxytocin is responsible for connecting to other people. So why would it, if we bring her body out of stress, now she wants to feel connected again. it's because her body literally feels safe to do so.
Can you explain like what the therapist was noticing that was different?
I mean,
Or what did she say?
yeah, she just said that her conversation, the way she is speaking is different. The way she's talking about her world is different.
Like in a more positive and light manner.
Yeah, and it's not like it was just this magic light switch where it's like everything in her life is fixed after one adjustment. It's not how it works. It's not how it works with anything. But the therapist was able to notice language that she was using and not using, and the way she just showed up as a person. And she's like, this is different. I've been working with you for 6 years. Danielle, I'm not making this up, right? Like, this is pretty much what the therapist said? Yeah.
That's huge because like therapy's also addressing the brain to a certain extent. Wouldn't you agree?
I think it's addressing patterns within the brain. But again, this is where we like get in trouble. But I don't know that it's impacting the actual brain.
Sure. That's fair. Yeah. I mean, I don't really know
Yeah.
much about it, but
I'll like shut up and just keep my place because I'm a chiro and not a therapist. But
Okay.
I think there's other stuff that we could talk about, but I won't.
okay, give us another example then.
Okay, so another example. These tend to be a lot of females because guys are just stubborn. But I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. Wes and I had a conversation with a guy last week who's like, I feel this calling on my life and I know that I'm anointed, but I just can't get it to click. And he's like, as much as I want to be faithful that God like has me, he's like, there's a part of me that just doubts all of it. And he's like, I can't figure out why. He's like, I'm going to church, I'm praying, I'm reading the Bible, I'm doing all this stuff. And so we just had a real conversation about, yeah, dude, if your physiology is stuck in that fear state,
Yeah.
you can't express those. And so we sat with him, and it's going to be an amazing journey for him. So that's the start of the journey. We haven't worked with him. Another example, another woman that we're taking care of. So she, super sweet, found us kind of randomly, but after I think her first 2 weeks, she just came in one day and she said randomly, she's like, hey, you want to know something crazy? She said, I've always wanted to be a social worker. And I just kind of put it on the back burner where I wasn't driven to necessarily do anything with it, but I want to, and I was passionate about it at one time, but I just stopped. And she said, the last 2 nights, I've been looking at applying to schools again. And she's like, I don't know why. I can't explain why. And I'm like, well, can I explain to you why? Because I know, and it has to do with what BJ talked about, is like the mental impulses.
Yeah.
When we wake up the brain, you feel safe to start to do things that you would not have done before, because the safety part of the brain tells you, no, you can't do it. It's too expensive. You don't have enough time. There's no way you can move. But the enlightened part of the keyword light in there, the cortex part of the brain, is the part of the brain that says, now you can do that. Like, there's a way. We'll find a way. It's the optimistic part of the brain. And that's what we activate when we create balance in the brain.
I'm like struggling with like, how do you get the population to understand that it's not about pain? It's really about the brain.
I think that this maybe people are going to be like, oh, put on your tin hat for this, but whatever, I'll just say it. So I think a lot of chiropractors have been celebrating the fact that like, oh, standard of care for back pain is chiropractic versus prescribing pain meds first.
Yes.
As cool as that sounds, it's like the biggest trick to get chiros to be like, oh yeah, we're standard of care for back pain. And everybody talks about it like before pain meds. And while I think that's a great thing, it further ingrains the idea in people's minds, in the public, that chiropractic cares for neck pain, back pain, and headaches.
Yeah.
And that's all it's good for. But when you understand the mental piece of it, which is arguably the most important piece of it, like this is connecting people back to who God designed them to be. Everybody has a specific identity. Every person's identity is different, but it literally cannot be expressed unless the frontal cortex is firing properly, which the best way, Roger Sperry, 1980, 90% of nutrition and stimulation to the brain comes from movement of the joints of the spine. So getting the joints of the spine adjusted, moving properly at a certain speed on the right side of the body to balance the brain, wakes up the brain, 90% of the brain's workout comes from movement of the spine. So if we get the spine moving correctly and stimulating the brain correctly, we can correct the cause of all the imbalances in the first place.
So how do you know when a chiropractor is or is not directly affecting that?
Ask them how they're measuring the brain. It's really, really simple. How are you measuring the brain? Well, we do a thermography scan. Okay, cool. How does a thermography scan measure the brain? Does the colors on one side tell me to adjust on one side versus the other?
Mm-hmm.
No. Okay, so how do you know how to adjust or where to adjust? Well, tight muscles here. Then like that's not like, yeah, you could be affecting the brain, but are you affecting the correct side of the brain? So there needs to be testing. And the best are like the functional neurologists, because they're testing more of the brain than I sometimes even feel like is necessary. Like that's just over the top, the knowledge that they have.
But then are they adjusting?
Well, that's a question. Are they adjusting?
Yeah.
I don't know. Sometimes just doing therapies.
Mm-hmm.
So again, but like functional neurologists are the best in terms of usually measuring all the pieces of the brain more so than we do.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a very specific process when we work with people that we take our clients through so that we know that we're measuring different parts of the brain, cerebellum, brainstem, frontal cortex, so that we know what to do with someone specifically when they lay down on our table.
Like tying it all together.
Yep, exactly.
But what about like chiros that want to know more about how to affect the brain? Like I feel like deep down, wholeheartedly, all the chiropractors that say they're neurologically based or say that they're brain based, like I think that they genuinely think that they're directly affecting the brain. But like maybe after hearing all of this, there becomes like this light bulb of like, well, I'm not really doing what I thought I was doing. So like where do they go from there?
Yeah, I mean, I would just find somebody who's doing it and start to ask them questions and learn about it. You know, like that's the point of this podcast, is to help teach people and connect them to a different way of practicing, a different way of thinking about the body, actually addressing the cause and addressing the big idea. Like BJ did not put it lightly when he said, when we affect 1 million people who have, and there's no coincidence that we talk about 1 million years of healthy living, because when we affect 1 million people,
Mm-hmm.
we affect a state,
Mm-hmm.
an entire state, and we can affect nations, and we can affect the globe if we have people in their right mind.
And if you have people in their right mind, their brain is balanced the way they were designed to,
Mm-hmm.
you're directly affecting their ability to be in their true identity and who God designed them to be.
Exactly. 100%. And you have to be. Like if you're not in a fearful state, your true identity is going to come. This is why people quit and move and go to school and take risk and do all the stuff that they do inside of our office. That's sometimes super frustrating because we just fall in love with people. And then they're like, hey, I have this passion. I'm out. I'm going to do this thing. And I'm like, that sucks, but it's also amazing for you, right? Because that's what the world needs. All of us to be in that like God-given identity. And that's why I get so passionate about chiropractic. That's why I talk so fast about it, because I know the potential that it has. And I know if more chiros were actually addressing the brain, they would get better results faster. And I think this would catch on with people where it truly could change the world.
Yeah.
So again, just to kind of wrap it all up, is like, are you measuring the brain? Are you not measuring the brain? This all has everything to do with identity and who you say that you are. And I think like, lastly, to really tie it all together, I think the philosophical perspective is the biggest one. Most chiropractors would agree that yes, we're vitalistic. We want to address the cause. We don't want to address symptoms. But I would argue that a subluxation is just a cause. Or a symptom. Yeah. So a subluxation is just a symptom of a greater cause that has to do with the brain. And if we live in a vitalistic paradigm, which says the body is self-healing, self-regulating, and self-maintaining, when I go to adjust and remove or kill a subluxation, aren't I removing the very thing that the body is trying to self-protect? And so then there's got to be a different way. And it goes back to the brain. Yeah. Because the brain tells the body what to do. And this is a concept called disafferentation. We could go into that whole thing on another episode, but that's not the point. It's to get in the weeds on the science on this one. Just remember, body's not broken. It knows how to heal itself. It always is. What you see on an x-ray may just be a symptom. Love you guys. Appreciate you. We'll come at you next week. Peace.